everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 12 of This Week in FCPA for the week ending July 8th of 2016. Today, my co-host and I, Mr. Translations himself, Jay Rosen, take a look at several things that we've been thinking about for some time. First of all, I talk about the line between the Yates Memo, the hiring of Hui Chen as compliance counsel, her pronouncements last fall leading up to the pilot program, and the three enforcement actions we've had since the pilot program, which I think really speak to a change in FCPA enforcement. Jay talks about how companies need to prepare to respond to this change in enforcement by ramping up their investigative processes so that they're ready to go and can, if they make the decision to self-disclose, turn over the information to the Department of Justice on a real-time basis. We also note the two hires. Pat Stokes goes to Gibson Dunn, and then Dan Chapman becomes the Chief Compliance Officer at Vimpelcom. We have a moment where we acknowledge the loss of life in Dallas with the police force today. Jay talks about his new weekly wrap-up of FCPA articles and compliance-related articles that have caught his interest in the week. The episode comes in at around 30 minutes. I hope you enjoy it. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to thank you very much for listening to This Week in FCPA. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA with Mr. Translations himself, Jay Rosen, for the week ending July 8th, 2016. Jay, we have had 5 consecutive days of no rain in Houston. I've had to start watering my lawn. I'm beginning to wonder if it'll ever rain again. So what is going on with the brush fires and it never rains in Southern California?
Well, I'm prepared this morning. It is 61 degrees and overcast here and beautiful Encino, California.
Is that prestigious Encino, California?
Well, it's not as prestigious as like Sherman Oaks, where the Dr. Demento show used to hail from. But Encino is solid in the valley. It's a good place to be.
So any sightings of Encino Man?
No, Brendan Fraser has not graced us in a while.
Okay. So, Jay, we had a, fairly slow, publicly pronounced FCPA week. So it maybe gives us some opportunity to explore some things in a little more depth that we normally don't get into. I think we probably both agree that we should start off our show by sending out condolences to not only police officers in Dallas, but the police officers everywhere for what they have to do for us. Horrible night in Dallas. And I don't know what the repercussions are going to be, but just shout out to the police officers in Dallas, their families, and everyone on the police force. So.
Yeah, I definitely share your comments and sentiments on this. So it's let's wish for the best.
Right. So the interesting thing about early July is even if you don't have a lot of enforcement action announcements, you do have some interesting half-year pronouncements. And there are some law firms that we both respect that put out some very interesting kind of quarterly, semi-annual, and annual FCPA reports. Sherman and Sterling, Gibson Dunn, Miller Chevalier. Several of those are coming out, and I hope we can both maybe take a deep dive into those as we progress. But if you are in the FCPA world at all, those are fabulous resources. The law firms put them out for free. They do great work. If you are new, old, or in the middle to the FCPA, I would take one of their annual reports and make a copy of it and keep it next to your FCPA Bible, which of course is Doing Compliance, the book I wrote. But great resources. Early on, I picked up the Sherman and Sterling and just sat and read and was just amazed at the depth and breadth and scope of what they do. But several firms do it on a quarterly basis. I know you take a look at those and use those not only for work, but also to help in your outreach programs and social media programs. So is there any one or more that you would recommend or that I haven't mentioned?
Yeah, I think you got them all, Tom. I think the interesting thing that we should look at when, kind of delving into these things are the scorecards and you're looking at whether there's been NPAs, DPAs, declinations, and then what the specific disgorgements are. So that really is going to be where the rubber meets the road, because at this point this year, we're more than we've got last year and the whole year in terms of fines. So the question is, well, how you break down those fines. And a shout out to our good friend, the FCPA prof. He, of course, took a different perspective of, looking at those fines and what they actually mean. So I love to quote something from Benjamin Disraeli, who said, there's statistics, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics. So it's interesting how people can make the numbers talk one way or the other. But I think you and I can both agree that there's been a sea change of activity within the FCPA this year in terms of how we are resolving situations. And the government, I think, is doing their best to be transparent, to show where you will be rewarded if you take the correct actions. And it'll be interesting to see what happens during the second half of the year.
There's some great points in there. Maybe we can unpack that and just kind of take a deep dive into this area, Jay. So first of all, many commentators bemoan the death of FCPA enforcement because of the dearth of FCPA enforcement cases in 2015. Was the lowest amount of enforcement action in terms of number of cases resolved, I think, in multiple years. And many ask, is enforcement finally tapering off? Well, that ended February 1st to March 1, it's leap year, so it was actually 30 days, 29 plus 1. We had more enforcement actions in that 30-day period than in all of last year. So really an explosion of cases, and it's not continued at that pace, but it's continued at a high pace since that time. And it really points to the difficulty in measuring numbers of enforcement. So although at least since the Romans, we've had a 12-month calendar, and I think many people measure by that calendar, and you and I are two of those. Getting ready I have a birthday coming up, so I'm thinking about that a lot. But it's the difficulty in measuring FCPA enforcement by year is that cases can take multiple years, 5-6 years. They can take 18 months. They can take 15 months, as we now know. So there's no rhyme nor reason really on when a case might be resolved, and a few weeks one way or the other can skew one year's statistics up or down, or the next year's statistics up or down. So it makes it difficult to I think, really compare in a meaningful way across the years. But I would certainly suggest that in calendar year 2016, and since I'm going to revert back to what we said you couldn't measure before, measuring in 2016, I find the number of cases increasing. And what I've been thinking and writing about in my column for Compliance Week in August is going to be the line from the Yates Memo through the analogic settlement, because I don't think you can view the Yates Memo, the new Compliance Council, her pronouncements, the DOJ pronouncements in November, the pilot program, and indeed the first 3 enforcement actions after the announcement of the pilot program singularly. I think you have to look at them as a continuum of, as you suggested, a move by the Department of Justice to be not only more transparent, but after the analogic Nortec settlements, really moving forward to resolve cases in a more quick and expeditious manner, which has been one of the criticisms, that it takes a long time to resolve an FCPA case. We have cases that we know of that started at least in 2012 that are still percolating along. So I think there has been a change, and the more I think and write about it, I see this change coming. I see the effects of this change. I see that companies need to now respond to this change. So, for instance, there was a speech in May by Sally Yates, monikered of the Yates Memo, where she said that companies are bringing in, quote, Yates binders, end quote. And in the Yates binders, this is factual information that they've obtained early on in their investigation, and they're disclosing before the completion of their investigations. And I think that is a change. And when the department gets this sort of ongoing data, information, and facts, they're going to be able to react more quickly to assess the case, to assess a potential penalty, if any, or in the case of Nortec, to Akami, I think is it Akami? Akami. Both got declinations to prosecute from the Department of Justice, which were pretty stunning developments. So clearly the department is moving in a direction, and I think the parameters of that direction are now being fleshed out a little bit, and we're going to see a different type of enforcement moving forward, which is, as you say, more transparent. I believe will be handled more quickly and efficiently, but it's not simply because the Department of Justice has changed its approach. It's because companies are responding, and companies are responding more quickly. They're requiring people like you. And I do want to get your thoughts on what it means for the investigative phase, particularly your part of the investigative phase, but they're responding more quickly, and their law firms outside counsel are responding more efficiently. And so it's a long-winded way to lead to the question is of if you're going to, with Nortec and Akame, they both discovered and or determined that there had been a potential violation, and within 30 to 60 days had self-disclosed to the Department of Justice even before their investigations were completed. How does that impact, or how would you suggest a company prepare for such eventuality where you're really going to have to turn over some pretty detailed information on a quick turnaround basis to the government, not just internally?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom. And one of the things that we see is that there's a certain timetable when people get involved in investigations. So I'm sure some of this will be elementary for our viewers, but I'll just go through it just to quickly address the process. So first thing that usually happens is outside counsel gets engaged. Then the next thing that happens is some type of forensic organization comes in, typically one of the big four or one of the smaller sister companies below there. At that point, we're in a game of trying to lock down as much information, image hard drives, figure out who the custodians are. And then at that point, they begin a foreign language document review. So up until that point, they don't really need a translations company. But once they start to find that relevant data set, at that point, they have to keep in mind that they're going to be producing to the DOJ and the SEC. And what you normally have to deliver are going to be certified full translations. And unfortunately, that's not something you can do in-house. You need to really engage a professional language solutions provider to do that. So just like you're going to have a law firm on retainer, or you're going to have a big four company that does your auditing, you really should have relationships with language solutions providers. And as I kind of quip when I talk to people, when you're in the middle of an investigation, you should not go to Google and type in translation companies, because at that point you're a little bit too late to the game. So just should you do that before or after you type in lawyer and FCPA? Well, in my book, you should do it before, but I just have some self-interest there.
Okay.
But my point is that if you are in business and a global business, at some point you're going to need legal translation help, whether it's going to be for IP work, for international arbitration, or litigation. So just like when you have an earthquake preparedness kit, right? You don't put it together when the earthquake happens, you put it together ahead of time. So I strongly suggest that it would behoove you to have relationships with not only one, but maybe multiple language solutions providers, because different companies have different strengths, and sometimes there's going to be volume and there's going to be overload. So there's really no excuse for going to Google and that. You should know who they are. And quite often what I see from my point of view is that there's a situation where you get the band back together, that I've worked with multiple AmLaw, 50 law firms. And when we will have an engagement again, it will be the law firm, it'll be the forensics company, and it'll be us. So it's almost like you build a really tight unit and you know how to respond to these things. And the last point before I take a breath and hand it back to you is before I was Mr. Translations, I was Mr. Physical Production, and I worked in Hollywood at 20th Century Fox and Warner Brothers. And one of the things that always struck me as interesting was that when you put together a crew of 100 or 150 people, you work together anywhere from 70 to 90 days. And right around that 3/4 point, it's a very well-oiled machine and everybody knows what to do. And then the shoot's done, boom, everyone goes off to their own thing. So it's kind of like that situation when you're doing an investigation. It's great if you can find partners who understand that unwritten playbook and just can go in and be more efficient. And if you do that, hopefully you won't be boiling the sea, but you can do more of a targeted investigation to respond in a timely manner and give the DOJ and the SEC relevant information for them to make quicker decisions.
And I just can't emphasize enough that how important I think this is going to become, or how much more important that companies need to be ready to jump on this. And with Kame and Nortec receiving declinations, I think was a pretty stunning result. The timing of their self-disclosures, I think with Nortec was before they'd even completed their investigation. So clearly the DOJ is moving in a direction to try to, I think, address some of the criticisms that have been leveled, and they're doing it with transparency. And with the enactment of the pilot program, I see that in doubling the size of the FCPA unit, we may have a much quicker, more expeditious resolution of companies who choose to self-disclose. So I'm going to watch this, but I think I'm seeing a trend, and I think it's something that companies and those, if there are any card-carrying members of FCPA Inc., please email me because I want to join. Somebody asked me at FCPA Inc. yesterday, and I said, what is this FCPA Inc.? How come I can't get in it? Really, what do I have to do? I want to know the secret handshake. So if you're an FCPA Inc., email me, I'll fill out the application, I'll send it in. Hopefully I'll get the card. If it's a secret handshake, I promise to keep it secret, even I'll do the, whatever it is, the little sign. So, but those folks need to be aware of this too. And I think everybody may need to recalibrate how they think through these things. And when the DOJ communicates to us, we need to listen. So, so what else has happened or struck you this week? No, here's what I want to ask you about. Tell us about your new social media outreach effort where you're writing something. I don't know if it's a weekly recap or I'm seeing more with a logo. So tell us about that, because that's new from you.
Yeah. When we started putting together our This Week in FCPA, believe it or not, folks, we just don't shoot for the hip, but we actually pull down some articles and we, figure out what we're going to talk about. So I thought that, well, I've been doing this research during the week, right? And I have all these news items that I want to talk about. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to kind of aggregate this and, have a little bit of a theme on what's happening. So that's kind of the genesis of Jay Rosen's Weekend Read. And last week we got colorful, and I had a graphic of baseball, hot dog, apple pie, and Chevrolet, and that was in honor of the 4th of July. And then we kind of tinkered with it a little bit and called it FIFA hotlines and declinations, and just to kind of spice it up for the holiday. But what I'm trying to do is you and I read all sorts of different news sources, whether it's the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, looking at specific client alerts. So I felt that if these are things of interest to us and we're discussing them, if I could kind of curate it and aggregate that in, a weekly blog, that it might be helpful to others. And I've been getting feedback just to that point that we should keep it going.
Well, I certainly agree. And I don't think there's anyone doing a weekly kind of wrap up. I wrap up my blog, but that's not the current events. And there are monthly wrap ups of significant developments. But once again, that's monthly. So I think you found a nice little niche, and I certainly appreciate it. And I like the kind of cool graphics. So I hope you can keep that up. So let me give you one, maybe one you can use this week, which is Harry Potter. And I'm a big fan of an entity called a teaching company, who puts out lectures on, it used to be lectures on tape, and now it's lectures virtually or CD or video. But I just finished a series about legendary fictional characters. And the final one was Harry Potter. And the professor called Harry Potter a whistleblower. And I have to admit, I'd never thought of Harry Potter as a whistleblower. And his thesis was that Harry was trying to make the magic world understand that the Dark Lord, he whom will not be named except on this show, Lord Voldemort, existed and was coming back. And if he took over the magic world, he would enslave the Muggle world, which unfortunately is you and me. Well, I don't know. Maybe you're part of that magic world and I just don't know it, but I am not.
No, I'm definitely a Muggle over here.
You're a Muggle? Okay. So I'm a Muggle as well. And the story was largely Harry trying to communicate that through obviously a great series of adventures, the magic world resisting his message, trying to stifle him, trying to isolate him from his friends, and Harry eventually overcoming. And of course, he had to overcome Lord Voldemort himself in the final episode. So, and I was intrigued by that in reading an article in the Financial Times about the recently concluded LIBOR trial in the United Kingdom. This was the third trial by the Serious Fraud Office. And one of the first trial, I got a conviction of Tom Hayes, who is in many ways the ringleader, or at least poster child for LIBOR manipulation. The second trial, they got a hung jury. And then the third trial, they convicted 3, 1 pled guilty, and 2 the jury hung on. There's a fourth set going, and the SFO have announced they are retrying the 2 that got a hung jury in this tranche. But one of the gentlemen, the Mr. Matthews, the testimony came out, he had been heavily bullied by his supervisor, Peter Johnson. Physical bullying, hit him, slapped him, psychological bullying him, called him names that this is a PG podcast that I cannot repeat.
Well, you could repeat it with the inverted initial consonants, right?
Right. I will say that it rhymes with the name Rick. And called him slow, thick, stupid, and a lot of other unpleasant terms, certainly things that are inappropriate in the workplace. And the article then led to what should Mr. Matthews' response have been. And this was at Barclays, or excuse me, UBS. And he talked about the futility of reporting. You can't report to the person who's abusing you, bullying you. You can't, the reporter didn't think, or the columnist didn't think he could report to the manager above him. And he even questioned whether calling into the hotline would be worthwhile, simply because you'd be so ostracized. So that is really antithetical to what the Department of Justice and Securities and Exchange Commission and any good compliance officer will feel is an important role of a hotline. And indeed, Roy Snell takes it a step further. Roy thinks, and he's talked about this on a podcast with me on Unfair and Unbalanced, that a compliance officer needs to stand up for that bullied employee if that information gets to the compliance officer's perspective. And the compliance officer can be seen as the conscience of the corporation. And initially I had resisted that. But given this example that came out in this trial, I think maybe Roy was onto something. And all tying back into Harry Potter, because I thought about all of the ostracizations and machinations that Harry's own magic community did and said against him to try to get him to shut up about he who would not be named. Really was an interesting tie-in. I'm not sure if that was fact following fiction or fiction following fact, but nevertheless, an interesting tie-in that I wrote about earlier in this week.
Yeah, I thought that was a great blog, and just to kind of throw in something from my weekend read last weekend, I can reprint it again. Is there's a great article in Fraud, which is the ACFE magazine, and it's written by Ryan Hubbs and Julia. And sorry, I'll butcher your name, Julia, but it's Knesch, Knieschhe. And they take a look at that exact phenomenon, Tom, about how people really lack any faith in that their concerns are being resolved in a hotline. And they talk about the top 10 tips to help make your hotline better. And I think one of the issues is that people think that when they report to a hotline, it kind of goes into a black hole, and that they're worried whether or not their concern is ever going to be addressed. So it really looks at it from both sides. From the company's point of view, how you have to create that culture that your concerns are going to be resolved. You have to give feedback and update, let the people know that their concern has been registered, let them know the timeline in which it may take. It could take months, it could take a while to get going. And then you also have to figure out a way to protect people. And if you don't do that, and you have that culture of abuse that you're talking about, a lot of the good people who might come in at an early stage and corroborate what's happening are going to instead just stay on the sidelines, because they're going to say, well, look at what happened to this person when they reported. I don't want to put my job on the line. I don't want to make it being a living hell for myself and my family. So it's a very interesting where you took that leap from, the thing about, it was Harry Potter an initial whistleblower. And I really love that blog. So thanks for contributing that.
Well, it was fun, and I really had, like I said, never thought about it sort of in that way. The other thing I found interesting this week, let me see if I can pull up the blog post. There was an interesting success in repatriation of monies stolen from a country, and the repatriation through the Kleptocracy Act. This is a kind of an ongoing debate about how do you send money back to a country where a ruler has stolen that money, if one, that ruler's still in place, and two, even if that ruler has been deposed and we've had regime change, then meet the new boss same as the old boss. But we had one success, and that success was reported in the Financial Times in an article by Kara Scannell called "Moving Money Out of Purgatory." And there was a entity called BOTA, B-O-T-A, that went to Kazakhstan, I think, and repatriated monies to actual individual citizens of the country. And they did this with the approval of the government, with the Kazakhstan government, with the approval of the United States government, so that individuals received money for things like medical services, sending their children to universities. And this was a multi-million-dollar distribution over multiple years. And I know many commentators, Matthew Stevenson at the Global Anti-Corruption blog has written about repatriation. Are there repatriation of funds issues under an FCPA fine and penalty? Is that different than the Kleptocracy Act repatriation? Nevertheless, it's interesting that we finally got one success story, because many people are concerned that if a company is prone to corruption, if you send the money back to the same people, like I said, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And in many cases, the old boss is still there. So Uzbekistan, I think, is going to be an interesting example, because nearly 500 to 800 million has been seized under the Kleptocracy Act. It was seized from accounts involving the daughter of the president of Uzbekistan. The president is still in power, so it's going to be very interesting to see if there can be a repatriation along the lines of the BOTA example.
So we won't get fooled again.
We won't get fooled again. But what you will get today is, of course, the New Yorker magazine. Where,
Uh-oh. Drum roll, please.
drum roll, please. This is the cartoon caption contest that I am a finalist in. And with the click of this mouse, well, maybe not. There it is. With a click of that mouse, you will see the link to the cartoon caption contest. So if you're watching this, if you will please go to that link and vote before midnight on Sunday, July 10th. You can vote. If you like mine the best, I would ask you to vote for me, or just go check it out. And the results will be announced a week from Sunday, I think. So a little more time left. I, of course, blogged about that earlier this week. So that's my big event, other than tomorrow is my birthday.
Well, happy early birthday, Tom. You know, it's good to know that you're of legal age and can vote. So that's a good thing. With regard to the New Yorker thing, is it like the All-Star game? Can we vote early and vote often, or only one vote per person?
I think I'm afraid to say you can only vote once. It's free. You will have to sign up some sort of registration. You know, I forgot to ask, if someone wanted to check out your weekly news summary recap, it comes out on the weekends, where would they go to find it?
You could just go to my LinkedIn profile and look at my posts as opposed to, my activity. But if you go to my LinkedIn bio, you'll see Jay Rosen's posts, and they're displayed by themselves. And then I also run that simultaneously on Facebook and Twitter. So there's a lot of different ways to get it. But there's not just one dedicated website.
Can I suggest to you that there's someone in your house not named Jay Rosen who could help you create a website where you could actually get that out? So, and I happen to know that very reasonable pricing. So
Okay.
might suggest to you to increase your social media presence somewhat. And if you need an introduction or referral, I'm happy to make that.
Yeah, that'd be very kind. And, if you could get me the family and friends pricing, I'd totally appreciate that.
I can even direct you to the closest Coach store.
So for your birthday tomorrow, which rock and roll band you seeing?
Actually, I'm going to the afternoon Astros game with my good friend Dan Chapman and his wife, Michelle, and I are going. And Dan is now officially the Chief Compliance Officer at Vimpelcom.
Awesome.
Yeah, Dan was at Parker Drilling. He got them through their DPA. Or through their investigation, which was just horrible facts, C-suite involvement in the bribery scheme, that sort of thing. Got a great result. Then he moved over to Cameron. Cameron was acquired by Schlumberger, and so he was on the market, and Vimpelcom came in and swooped him up. For those who don't know, Vimpelcom has about the second largest total anti-corruption fine in the history of the world ever. It's a huge, huge challenge. And if there's one person I would have recommended they hired, Dan Chapman. So going to see he and his wife. They're going to be moving to Amsterdam to head up Vimpelcom's remediation effort after the resolution of their enforcement action.
Great. And last thing, any notes on your Pet Sounds concert from last weekend?
Yes. It was good to see Brian Wilson one last time, probably the last time. So Al Jardine is the guitarist, was the lead guitarist for the Beach Boys. His son sang lead, interestingly, on most of that album, and indeed most of the classic Beach Boy songs. They did about a 30 or 40-minute encore of just rolling through every song. And sorry for those who look forward to my video post. I was just dancing too much and having too much fun to record any video. So.
Well, we saw a little bit, didn't you? You had a bit up from the Sloop John B, and there was something else, right?
Sloop John B. I think I posted Good Vibrations and not maybe Wouldn't It Be Nice, but it may have been something else.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Here in Woodland Hills, we had a former Beach Boy one of the guitar players, and he had his group, and he also had some younger folks who could hit the high notes.
Right.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, wishing you all the best. Enjoy your birthday, and
All right.
we'll be back here next week. Same blab time, same blab channel to talk about everything and anything that's happened this week in the FCPA.
Thanks a lot.